First off, I want to talk about the press as the fourth estate. Okay. The term actually goes back to British Parliament. Many people in the United States, when they use the term, and you know what, you may actually even hear other professors at SDSU make this mistake. It's an understandable mistake. Many people in the United States believe that the press as a fourth estate is analogous to the different branches of government, right? If you remember that from high school, executive, judicial, and legislative, that we have the press functioning as another means of checks and balances, right? If we have a free, robust, functioning press, they can provide another balance to government corruption or people doing negative things. Now, I asked you guys to watch the other video first, which is just an episode of the Patriot Act. I know it was a little long, but I think it was very, very informative. And there were some just great, great examples in there. If you remember the example about Bell, California, where these city officials raised their rate and were just making an exorbitant amount of money, exploiting the taxpayers, that kind of thing can happen. People get away with that kind of thing when you have no local reporters to find out what's going on. So, whatever your political persuasion might be, I think we all need to agree we need a functioning, robust press to help maintain our democracy. Now, the textbook does talk in good detail about the Watergate scandal and stressing the importance of adversarial journalism. Okay. Sometimes people refer to journalists functioning as a watchdog. This is another way of saying providing checks and balances. Watergate scandal was perhaps the biggest example of government corruption, at least in modern history, that the Nixon administration was doing. And these two reporters, starting from a small story that didn't seem to be that big, grew bigger and bigger and bigger, and then was, lo and behold, found out to be true. And they exposed a whole wide range of illegal activities that President Nixon was involved with. Now, they were helped by an undercover informant who went by the name Deep Throat. Deep Throat, if you're not aware, was also the title of a very popular adult film that was going on at the time. So the name Deep Throat was an allusion to this man being on deep background, but also an allusion to this adult film. Investigative stories are important, but what goes into an investigative story? Sometimes it can be a tip from a concerned citizen or a whistleblower, someone who's trying to expose corruption from the inside. Journalists typically don't like to use anonymous sources, or at least they shouldn't. We in journalism school advise people not to use anonymous sources if they can get away with it, but sometimes an individual simply cannot or will not reveal their identity. There could be something negative that would happen to them if they reveal their identity. So there are reasons why someone may be an anonymous source, but generally that's not the preferred way to get information. When someone is willing to go on the record, that means they're willing to have their name used. The slide here mentions the FOIA request. We've covered that in a previous module, so you should be aware of that. Here are some examples of adversarial journalism from the past 20 years. The textbook talks about the Abu Ghraib prison scandal, where American soldiers were torturing and even killing Iraqis, many of whom weren't even charged with a crime. I have talked about this topic in classes before, and sometimes individuals get upset. They want to defend what was happening, saying that it was okay, that we were only torturing bad guys. And many of these people weren't even charged with a crime. And even if they had allegedly done something bad, American policy is not to torture individuals, okay? If it becomes public and it becomes widely known that American soldiers torture people they capture, that makes it much more likely for Americans to be tortured as well. So I think, I'm going out on a limb here, maybe I'm taking a moral stance. I don't think torture is right, okay? I don't think torture is right. Do a little bit of digging. You can find plenty of photos online. There's some stuff that's even too horrific. I don't even want to mention what was going on, but this was an example of a story that was exposed because of adversarial journalism. We also have the story from 2007. It was about terrible conditions at a medical center for veterans being really, there's a typo on the slide. Thank you. That's courtesy of the publisher, Rowman and Littlefield. Thank you for that typo. Walter Reed Army Medical Center. Really horrible way to be treating veterans. And again, that was a story that people were trying to cover up, keep secret, that was exposed.
Journalism as dangerous business.
The textbook also talks about the chilling effect. When one journalist is beaten, killed, or physically threatened or harassed by the government or the police, this action, even though it maybe only affects one journalist, could make all other journalists less willing to do some type of hard-hitting investigative journalism. And at the time of this recording, I'm doing this recording in the summer of 2023. When I think about journalism as dangerous business, two things come to mind. One is there have been a rash of murders of journalists in Mexico recently. I think a lot of these people are doing stories about corruption and the dangers of the drug cartel. And obviously, both the government and the drug cartels do not like this. And then we also have this now notorious story, Jamal Khashoggi, a US based, he was actually a Saudi first, but he was operating from other countries, doing stories that the Saudi government did not care for. They had him murdered, really brutal kind of murder that happened in Turkey. They managed to persuade him to come into, I think it was a consulate in Turkey where the murder took place. And it does seem overwhelmingly apparent as to who was behind this. And the US has really not done much about it. I think probably because the Saudis are such big allies of ours and we get so much oil from them. Sorry, that's my opinion. That's what I think. Adversarial journalism or watchdog journalism, whatever you want to call it, is really in danger today. It's a threat. There is an economic decline in media organizations. Okay, that was talked about in the previous video. That's why I wanted you to see it. I've already stressed how important journalism is to a functioning democracy, but we have fewer international bureaus. We have fewer full-time international reporters, and we have a lot of freelancers and part-timers who have less protection in terms of personal security and healthcare coverage. And some of you may think, well, I don't need to get my news from journalists. I can get all my news from social media. But you should be aware, Twitter and Facebook and Snapchat and Instagram, these outlets do not have news bureaus in other countries, okay? They are picking up information, perhaps false information, perhaps unreliable information. So I do think that there's a danger to democracy when news outlets are under economic threat. This slide talks about the relationship between the powerful and the press, okay? Now, there's one point, it's not indicated here on the slide, but I want to stress, reporters rely on access, often access to government officials to get information, or police officials, or maybe individuals at a university. Or imagine if you are a reporter covering a sport, you have to have access to the managers and to the players, etc. So you have to sort of maintain some type of cordial relationship with these individuals so that they won't ban you from a press conference or that they will even accept your questions. That kind of relationship leads to positive press coverage, okay? Especially with sports. I mean, I'm a sports fan. I'm not trying to malign sports, but how could you really cover a sporting team? Maybe they've done something wrong. Maybe one of the players has done something possibly illegal. Do you want to be thrown out of the locker room, right? Do you want to get banned from covering the games? So that type of relationship, I think, exists in all forms of press coverage, not just sports. The other thing that the textbook talks about, and this is what the photo here is with Fallon and Obama, politicians like to go on these entertainment shows, okay, to play up their image, to seem soft and fuzzy, to make them seem more warm and relatable. A very, very famous example of this is Clinton, back in 1992, when he was running for president, appeared on the Arsenio Hall show playing saxophone. Okay, now granted, Arsenio Hall was never known for being a hard-hitting journalist. His show was not really journalism, it was a talk show. But do you think having a politician on your show, telling jokes, maybe doing a funny skit, do you think that that is going to encourage or discourage the host from asking hard-hitting, probing questions, okay? If the politician later does something wrong, Clinton got in big trouble with the Lewinsky scandal, do you think Arsenio Hall wants to be the one to expose him? This is his friend, after all, okay? So pay attention. I think we'll probably see more of this, the way politicians are using entertainment shows or even just editorial opinion shows where they know the journalists, they want to go on to get softball questions. Most of this lecture was recorded back in 2021. Here's an update. I'm doing this in the summer of 2023. And just as your very intelligent professor accurately predicted, we are going to see more and more of these softball interviews. Very recently, there was an interview with President Joe Biden on MSNBC, widely considered to be a softball interview because the host did not ask him about some pretty tough issues, including the Hunter Biden issue that's going on. And even if you believe that the Hunter Biden issue is a non-issue, a nothing burger, as it were, it is nonetheless a very, very big news story. So if nothing else, one might expect for the host of that show, the journalist doing the interview with Biden, there should at least be one question about it. You know, I'm saying, even if you think it's a nothing burger, it's worth at least one question. But no, there were no questions at all. It was the classic softball interview. The textbook talks about agenda setting in the digital age. Okay, we've covered this. Just to repeat, agenda setting is the idea that the media does not tell you what to think, but it tells you what to think about. And then the textbook also talks about gatekeepers, which I have discussed previously in another module. Journalists kind of decide what information gets out and what gets covered. And the way this functions with politics is, which politicians do they choose to cover? Okay, if you have 16, 17 people running for president, there were many, many Democratic candidates up until quite recently. And in the previous election, there were many, many Republican candidates. The press will function on one or two, give those people most of the airtime, and lo and behold, those people become the nominee. Okay, so pay attention to the way this gatekeeping function works. Okay, now this is a little sad. I'm going to play two clips here. But Mindich is a big believer in young people being more informed. And I'm assuming that that's most of the people that are in this class right now. I'm assuming that you are in, let's say, the younger demographic. On the whole, you guys are not consuming a lot of news. That's a problem, right? Because we're all supposed to be voting. Everyone age of 18 and above goes to vote. How can you make a reliable choice in a national election or a local election if you have no idea what's going on, right? Are you just making a guess based on what your parents tell you, what your boyfriend or girlfriend tells you, how well you like someone's name, right? Here are some examples of, one is from Jimmy Kimmel, and then the next one is a clip from people in San Diego who don't know some pretty basic information.
Talking to people about healthcare today.
Okay.
Do you support Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act?
Affordable Care Act.
And why is that?
Well, I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of Obama, so I don't support him in the Obama things that he's got going on. I'm actually really excited for President-elect Donald Trump, so.
Right. So you don't like anything Obama does, and you prefer the Affordable Care Act?
Absolutely.
Do you support Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act?
I support Obamacare.
So if you were a senator and you could vote today, you would vote to keep Obamacare instead of the Affordable Care Act?
Yes.
Do you support Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act?
I guess the Affordable Care Act?
And why do you prefer the Affordable Care Act over Obamacare?
I'm not really sure. My girlfriend supports Trump, so I go with whatever she says.
What country did we declare independence from to celebrate the 4th of July?
I don't know.
What is the purpose of 4th of July celebrations?
I'm going to turn it to the guy in the USA shirt.
Fireworks. A little more specific. A little more specific.
Celebrating our independence.
There we go. A little more specific still. Independence
Day.
From a country. Step in here at any time. Which country was that?
History was not my subject. I slept through that class.
And happy 4th of July.
Thank you. Happy 4th to you guys.
When Jesse Ventura, John Wilkes Booth, and the other founding fathers signed the Declaration of Independence, what year was that?
1870 something, but I don't remember the specific year.
What's the purpose of 4th of July weekend?
I don't know, celebrate our independence.
A little more specifically, please.
I really don't know. I don't know. I mean, that's all I know.
I'm revoking your celebration. You're no longer allowed to celebrate. Celebration can't.
In closing, here are some final points from the textbook. Americans are consuming less traditional news, but they are getting their news from Facebook and Twitter, and I've already talked about the need to be literate and skeptical and discerning about what you consume. Younger Americans are, however, more informed in some ways than the older generations, particularly when it comes to specific issues. However, younger Americans are less informed about names and affiliations in politics and might not know some pretty basic information. So, in closing, news is important. I believe strongly in adversarial journalism and support your local news.